everyone, this is Linda from Colourwerx Designs, and welcome back to week number 2 of the Splendor QuiltAlong. It is so great to have you guys back this week. Week number 2 is all about applique stitching 12 of these fabulous little flower blocks. But before we can go ahead and do that, the first things first, we need to have all of our background units cut. And what you need to do is follow along with the diagram that's in the pattern and lay out all of your background units on a design wall or your floor. If you're just joining us this week, go ahead and go back to week number 1's blog post, which you'll find on the Colourwerx website under the blog, and refer to that to find out what materials you'll need, how to get your pattern, and also how to pre-cut your background fabrics according to the pattern. Again, once your background fabrics are pre-cut, go ahead and lay them out on your design board before you start applique stitching. And the reason being is you might be using an assortment of 9 fabrics or 12 fabrics or just scraps from your stash. And before you go ahead and applique stitch up all these blocks, you're going to want to make sure that you have dispersed the value and any patterns that are in the fabrics evenly across your quilt top. Once you are satisfied with what you're seeing on your design board, go ahead and grab your smart device and take a picture, and that way you can remove them from your design board and always have something preserved to go back to. So let's do that. So now that I've got a picture of my background fabric, let's head over to my cutting board and I'm going to show you how to prepare your applique shapes and get them ready for applique stitching. So to begin to prepare your shapes for fusible machine applique, go ahead and grab your Splendor pattern, open it up, and take out the pattern page that looks like this. These are full-size pattern shapes. No reducing or enlarging is necessary. You have the small shapes for the flower and the larger shapes for the larger flower here. Grab your fusible web such as Heat and Bond Light or Steam Seam 2 Light, and you're going to a number 2 pencil and start to trace all your shapes independently of each other. So this is about a quarter of my shapes done needed for the small flower appliques. I'm going to need to trace 12 sets of these. Notice that I have traced these all the petals individually from each other, and I have actually transcribed the numbers too. That's important when we place the small flowers in formation on their blocks. Once you've traced all your shapes onto your fusible web, go ahead and rough cut those shapes out, and that looks like this. So this is a rough cut, and notice that I've left about a 1/4 inch of fusible web beyond the drawn line. So once I rough cut out all my petals, it's time to start fusing these to the wrong side of the fabrics I would like the petals to be. So here I have a petal fused to the wrong side of orange fabric. This is the right side of the fabric. This is the wrong side of the fabric. And then I'm ready, once I've ironed these all on, I'm ready to start cutting out on the drawn line. So here I have one that is slightly cut out almost all the way. Use a sharp pair of scissors and just go ahead and cut out right on the drawn line all your petal shapes. And then you'll be ready to do applique stitching once we fuse them to the background fabrics. So before we move on to fusing and applique stitching our small flower petals to our background blocks, I just wanted to share a little tip that I have for making your flower blocks a little bit more interesting. Many of you know who've been following, I've been using the Tula Pink True Colors 10-inch stack. This is a gorgeous stack of her new collection of 10-inch squares, and you get 42 in the stack. And so I decided to do each one of my small flower blocks out of 3 different fabrics from the 10-inch stack in different colorways. So what you're looking on the cutting board right now is my yellow-orange colorway. This will be the top center flower in the Splendor quilt. And so instead of just cutting all the flower petals on one side from this fabric and all the flower petals on the other side from this fabric, I came up with a little formula that I'm going to share with you that you can use for your smaller flower blocks as well. So I'm going to label this one fabric number 1, and I'm going to cut flower petal shapes 1, 4, and 7 from that. I'm going to label the middle fabric number 2, and I will cut shapes 2, 5, and 8 from that. And lastly, I will label the orange fabric number 3, and I'm going to cut shapes number 3, 6, and the center from that. And what that will yield once I cut all my shapes is I will end up with a small flower block that will look like this. And that just adds a little bit more variety, a little bit more texture, and a little bit more fun to each one of my small flower blocks. So now it's time to fuse all our applique petals to our background blocks. But before doing so, you might want to create for yourself a pattern overlay sheet. This one that I have here on my ironing board is created from a product called Pattern Ease, which is available at Joann's or some of the local quilt shops. It's a dressmaking interface that is non-fusible. You can also create a pattern overlay sheet from tracing paper that you might have at home or a plain piece of white paper. What this overlay sheet does is assist you and guide you in placing your shapes in the right place when you are getting ready to fuse them to your background fabric. And although this little Splendor flower pattern is very simple, it's very easy to get disorientated and place these flower petals a little askew from each other, which then causes the block to look rather funky. So create yourself an overlay sheet, and I will show you how that works next. So here is my background block, and I will simply take my overlay sheet and place it smack dab in the center of where I want my petals to be. Now I'm going to take my petal shapes, and here's my first large one. It has the release paper on the back side. I'm going to need to remove the release paper. If you're having a problem removing this release paper, simply score it with a pin, like so, and remove the release paper. It should break right off. Peel all the release paper off, and then gently guide your piece underneath the overlay fabric onto your background block. And continue going around your flower block, placing your petals in the formation using the pattern overlay sheet to assist you. Once you have all your shapes in place, just hit it with an iron. You can use a little bit of steam if you'd like, and press those pieces down onto your background fabric. You're going to need to use about a hot heat and use about 10 to 15 seconds worth of hot heat to get them to stick. Now you're ready to choose some fabulous applique thread, and we're going to head over to the machine and do our applique stitching. So I'm here at my machine, and I have all my flower petals now fused or ironed to my background fabric in formation. And I've also attached on the back side of my background block a piece of stabilizer. This is my favorite stabilizer called Sulky Iron-On Tearaway Stabilizer. This is available at most Joann's or quilt shops. And also, if you have any kind of digitized embroidery stabilizer for your digitized embroidery machine, you could use that as well. You'll need to attach a stabilizer to the back of your background block to help stabilize your stitching, especially if you're doing a zigzag stitch or a decorative stitch. I'm at my Bardina and I have my zigzag stitch selected. I usually like to start with my stitch width at about 2.5 to 3, depending on my mood, and then my stitch length is usually about 0.9 or just under the 1. So I'm going to go ahead and start stitching on the big petal right here. First things first is I need to bring up my my bobbin thread up to the top. So I'm going to do that by taking one stitch in place like so. And you can see that my bobbin thread popped up. When I took that one stitch in place, I bring the bobbin thread up to the top. I'm going to use the secure stitch function on my machine so it will knot my thread before I start zigzagging. My needle goes right down in the same hole that I brought the bobbin thread up, and I'm ready to go. That is it for week number 2. So join us next week for week number 3. We'll be working on this large center, beautiful flower applique. And until then, happy quilting, everybody, and thank you so much again for joining us.